All right, welcome everybody for the fourth and final reading of How Jesus and His Followers Saved Civilization. So this has been a very fun journey so far. We're gonna be done this by today. We'll I'm sure have a fun conversation as we always do afterwards. Um, Anybody who is just jumping in, watching on YouTube, and you don't know what the previous readings were all about, go to the description box, check those readings out. You can click on the link in the description box as well to download the PDF of the original document by Robert Dreyfuss that we're reading. So I won't say anything about that. We just need a reader for today. I know Paul's been wonderful. Paul, have you and LTV been working on recording the cleaned up version of this, or?
I got an email and replied to that email. Basically, just my understanding was that there was an audio book being made, and the first thing I did was simply say that any recordings that have been made, you can use any way you like.
That's
From
good.
there, nothing since. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, cool.
Okay.
So, let me just do a screen share. Um, who would like to be today's reader?
I read?
Yeah, of course, of course. And I'm thinking, let's just reread a couple of paragraphs from where we left off last week, just to review a few thoughts. Does anybody feel like they want to do a little refresher of some of the important topics that were touched upon in last week's reading? We don't have to. I mean, it's perfectly fine. I vaguely remember we're into the story of Paul, the subversion of a certain pseudo-Christian cult that was actually very, very evil, acting like it was Christian in the form of Simon the Magi,
Simon, yeah.
who was undermined, fortunately, by the collaborative efforts of Paul and, according to Eusebius, an early Christian historian, Philo. So this is, as far as I can see, the source of the stories that Rabbi Philo of Alexandria and Paul were collaborating together against the the cults of Rome, specifically the big cult, capital C, and its smaller manifestations. That's from Eusebius, who's a very, very interesting Platonist, early church father, pre-Nicaea, who did a lot of amazing work. I got a few of his books that I bought on Abe Books, which are fantastic reads. So we had that story introduced, and Paul's intervention into the geopolitical terrain, the epistemological terrain. So let's just jump, I guess, into according to the Acts of the Apostles is probably a good spot where they start Paul's journey.
All right, is that the biggest you can make it?
Oh, I can make it bigger.
Yeah.
But just speak,
Hard.
read it nice and slowly too. People I've noticed who
Nope.
listen to this on the go when they're driving their cars like slow reading.
Okay. And when they had gone through the isle unto
Oh,
Paphos.
start with according to the Acts of the Apostles up here.
Okay. According to the Acts of the Apostles, Paul's first organizing mission took him to Cyprus and then into Asia Minor. Many Jews were then working in the mines on Cyprus, and the island's Jewish community was made up of many Hellenized Jews who fled there to escape the persecutions.
Hold on one second.
Jerusalem.
One second. There's some background sound here.
On my part?
No. Could everybody except for Rick mute themselves? Okay, it sounds so much better now. Okay, so why don't you just
Okay.
restart, because there was some weird background walking.
Okay. According to the Acts of the Apostles, Paul's first organizing mission took him to Cyprus and then into Asia Minor. Many Jews were then working in the copper mines on Cyprus, and the island's Jewish community was made up of many Hellenized Jews who fled there to escape the persecutions in Jerusalem in the year 36 AD. Paul arrived there approximately 10 years later. Together with Barnabas, Paul arrived in Paphos, where they sought a meeting with the Roman proconsul, Sergius Paulus, but their way was blocked by a sorcerer, a member of the cult priesthood who feared that Paul would undermine the power of the cult in Paphos, as Acts records. And when they had gone through the isle unto Paphos, they found a certain sorcerer, a false prophet, a Jew whose name was Bar Jesus, the deputy of the country, Sergius Paulus, a prudent man who had called Paul and Barnabas and desired to bear the word of God. But Elymas, the sorcerer, for so is his name by interpretation, withstood them, asking to turn away the deputy from the faith. Then Saul, who is also called Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit, set his eyes upon him. Okay. And said, O full of all subtlety and mischief, thou child of the devil, thou enemy of all righteousness, wilt thou not cease to pervert the right ways of the Lord? Acts 13, 6-10. Following this confrontation, Sergius Paulus was made a Christian. Leaving Cyprus, Paul and Barnabas arrived in Asia Minor and traveled from city to city, preaching in the Jewish synagogues. In one city, after having preached to the Jews in the synagogue, the non-Jewish residents of the city began to clamor for another sermon from Paul, and the next day came together almost the whole city to hear the word Logos of God, Acts 13:44. Constantly, Paul in his travels would confront in one form or another the representation of the cults and the pagan philosophers. In chapter 14 of Acts, a confrontation with the priests of Jupiter is cited. And in chapter 19, Acts notes the destruction of the cult of Diana in Ephesus, in which many of them also, which used the curious arts, i.e. the occult, brought their books together and burned them. The teaching of Paul panicked the leader of the cult there. Ye men of Ephesus, proclaimed the town clerk, a follower of Diana, what man is there that knoweth not that the city of Ephesus is a worshipper of the great goddess Diana and the image which fell down from Jupiter? The town clerk urged the population to do nothing rashly and sought to prevent the Roman police from taking action against his city for breaking the custom. But Paul, nevertheless, is reported to have consolidated a strong Christian grouping in Ephesus. On arriving in Athens, once the intellectual capital of the world, Paul saw that the city was wholly given to idolatry and sought to find some forces there that would acknowledge that the Christians at least promise some way out of the intellectual and moral bankruptcy represented by Roman rule. In Athens, Acts reports, certain philosophers of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him, and some said, what will this babbler say? Trying to provoke Paul, they taunted him to explain the new faith. But Paul, realizing the utter immorality of the Stoics and their ilk, said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. Despite Paul's ridicule, he made no headway in Athens. Acts 17:18-23. What do such stories indicate? Traveling almost alone from city to city and from synagogue to synagogue, Paul was bringing the message of the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth to entire communities of Jews and then Gentiles who had probably heard of Jesus' work merely by rumor and reputation. Paul's, let's see. I mean, I'm checking. Wait a minute. Paul's primary audience was exactly that community of scattered Hellenized diaspora Jews to whom the works of Philo Judaeus of Alexandria were undoubtedly already known and debated. In scenes that were repeated countless times, Paul and his aides confronted the evil cults and the mystery religions which the simple message of Jesus of Nazareth. For the inner elite, for the educated class of Jews who hated Rome and everything it stood for, Paul's exposition of the Gospels would transmit the epistemological and philosophical concepts of Plato's Timaeus and the Republic, along with the work of Philo. For the masses, Paul brought the good news that the Messiah had arrived to fulfill Old Testament hopes. Among his hearers, divisions were immediately evident. The more narrow-minded tribalists among the Jews and the assimilated, comfortable Jewish upper class often violently opposed Paul's admittedly radical redefinition of Judaism, while a certain fraction of the synagogues' congregation adopted Christianity as their own. At the same time, Paul was fighting a battle within the Christian leadership. In particular, a faction of Christians in Jerusalem, led apparently by James, the brother of Jesus of Nazareth, opposed the introduction of Gentiles into the faith. But Paul, supported by the authority of Peter, succeeded in winning approval from the Jerusalem Council for the inclusion of non-Jews among the faithful. The decision was made to develop a universal Christianity rather than the more parochialist version of Palestinian Christianity that had prevailed until that time. In his epistle to the Romans, Paul often contrasts the externally oriented Jewish law, comprised of countless rules and regulations dealing with the behavior of the Jew in daily life, with the internal, soul-directed content of Christian law. Citing the laws on circumcision, for which centuries had marked the Jews as a separate group, Paul says, "For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he be a Jew which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God." Romans 2:28-29. What distinguishes Paul's epistles and makes them so moving is the deeply felt struggle that Paul presents as taking place within himself as a human being. With Jesus as the ideal model and the intercessor and mediator with God, Paul urges his readers to put on Christ, to suppress the passions of the flesh and the senses, and to achieve an internal discipline that will allow one to master the tendency to sin. "But I keep down my body and bring it into subjection," writes Paul, "lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway." 1 Corinthians 9:27. More than any of the Gospels, with the exception of John, the writing of St. Paul reflects a deep mastery of the Neoplatonic conceptions that served as the foundation of the Christian movement. Throughout the epistles, one can find poetic, almost lyrical passages that communicate such conceptions. One example, one of the most famous and most often quoted in Paul's work, is the following, taken from chapter 15 of the first epistle to the Corinthians. "There are also celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. There is a natural body, and there is a spiritual body. The first man is a man of the earth, the second man is the Lord from heaven. As is the earthly, such are they also who are earthly, and as is the heavenly, such are they that are heavenly. And we have borne the image of the earthly, and as we have borne the image of the earthly, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. Now I say this, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but all shall be changed. In a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, and this mortal shall have put on incorruptibility and immortality, and then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? 1 Corinthians 15:40, 44, 70, 47, 52, and 45, 54 to 55. The Christian movement was growing rapidly. With the apostles and their followers scattered from Palestine, the worldwide influence of the movement began to assume substantial proportions. Peter, as has been mentioned, spent the period from approximately 42 to 49 AD in Rome, where he established the foundation of the Christian movement in the city that would eventually become its capital. It was during this time also that Peter and Philo Judaeus are said to have collaborated in their fight against Simon Magus and the Roman cults. Increasingly, the Jewish community within Rome, which had also exercised a certain positive moral influence in that decadent city, began to be won over to the principle that, in the face of the utter depravity of the Roman elite, men of morality must act without regard for their own lives in the interest of saving the human race. Such Jews, though not alone in their fight, made up the Christian movement in Rome. By the year 49 AD, the Jewish community, with the influence of Peter's dedicated leadership, came to present a serious problem to the emperor and Rome's oligarchical families. In that year, Emperor Claudius announced that all Jews would be henceforth expelled from Rome. Suetonius, the Roman historian, states the matter succinctly. Because the Jews at Rome caused continuous disturbances at the instigation of Christ, he expelled them from the city. Suetonius' reference to the agitation of the Jews on behalf of Christ is one of the few non-Christian historical references to the early Christian movement. It is a quite important indication of the growing power of the Jewish Renaissance, a movement that so far had not secured official recognition in anything other than a mere sect of Judaism. Along with the thousands of Roman Jews, Peter was forced to flee Rome. Aside from this recorded instance of persecution, however, the earliest Christians went about their work largely unmolested by official authorities, with only the priesthood of the cults and the paramilitary forces to contend with. Of course, such forces were not to be trifled with, nor, by the same token, could the local governments and in Palestine, the official Jewish leadership be ignored as a source of persecution. Saint Paul himself records his punishments at the hands of various enemies during his 3 organizing missions. 5 times I have received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less 1. 3 times I have been beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I have been shipwrecked on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger at false brethren. 2 Corinthians 11:25. But during his 3 journeys, Paul managed to install the leadership for Christians in dozens of cities across the Mediterranean, from Antioch to Cyprus and Rhodes, Ephesus, Corinth, Miletus, Philippi, and many others. His first journey occurred from approximately 46 to 48, his second from 49 to 52, and his third and final journey from 53 to 58 AD. Concluding this voyage in Jerusalem, Paul was arrested at the instigation of the anti-Christian faction of the Jews and held for 2 years in confinement. In 60 AD, Paul was shipped to Rome, where he was held for 3 more years under effective house arrest by the Roman authorities. By this time, the Emperor Claudius, 41 to 54, had died and was replaced by the Emperor Nero, 54
Just quick
to
here,
69.
I just want to quickly review this little map here of the different missions that Paul had set up. So these are all different sort of, I guess, call them little communities that were in communication with each other, and Paul had set up many of them and had organized the leadership together. So that's a pretty wide sphere of influence, right? That's growing up around the Roman world, stretching all the way from Jerusalem to Sicily, Italy, Thessalonica. Yeah. Sorry. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
We've often heard in the news lately about the Galatian Nazis in Ukraine. That's why I was wondering, is there any is this connected at all to Galatians in the Bible, or where? Because it says here that it's in Turkey.
Never thought about
No.
the connection. Quan, what do you say?
Now, the Galatia in present Turkey is written with a T, and the western portion of Ukraine, Galatia, is written with a C. So no connection.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Should I continue?
Sure.
Okay. Concluding this voyage from
I think you
Jerusalem.
read over the intervening centuries.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Where is that again?
It's right here.
Okay. Over the intervening centuries, Nero has come to symbolize the most extreme sort of brutal, inhuman tyrant. Among his other distinctions, Nero has the honor of being the first emperor to have deliberately and systematically persecuted the new Christian faith. Not intending to write a history of Rome, we do not present here anything resembling a comprehensive account of Nero's years on the throne, but a few glimpses of this monster from the pages of Suetonius, the Roman historian of the early 2nd century, are necessary to indicate the evil incarnate that was Nero. As soon as night fell, he would he would snatch a hat or cap and make a round of the taverns, prowl the streets in search of mischief, and not always innocent mischief either, because one of his games was to attack men on their way home from dinner, stab them if they offered resistance, and then drop the bodies into the sewers. And an escort of senior officers would follow him at a discreet distance. Okay. He further reports, not satisfied with seducing freeborn boys and married women, having tried to turn the boy Sporus into a girl by castration, he went through a wedding ceremony with him, dowry, bride, and all, which the whole court attended, then brought him home and treated him as a wife. He dressed Sporus in the fine clothes normally worn by an empress and took him in his own litter, actually through the street of Images at Rome, kissing him amorously now and then. I was wondering if you can make it a little bit bigger. It's hard for me to see. If you could. There we go. That's good. Many emperors' practice obscene and perverse sexual habits and the degeneracy of the Roman nobility was legendary. But Nero seems to have shocked even official Roman historians, normally inured to such behavior. Again, from Suetonius, we learn that Nero practiced every kind of obscenity and at last invented a novel game. He was released from a den dressed in the skins of wild animals and attacked the private parts of men and women who stood bound to stakes. After working up sufficient excitement by this means, he was dispatched, shall we say, by his freedman Doryphorus. Doryphorus now married him, just as he had married Sporus, and on the wedding night he imitated the screams and moans of a girl being deflowered. For Nero, such practices are not aberrations. On repeated occasions, he would fly into a rage and threaten to execute the entire Roman Senate, and even to murder all of Rome's nobility for some petty whim or minor infraction. He was superstitious and always under the influence of astrologers and priests, especially those of the Syrian goddess Atargatis. He ordered men brutally murdered for no reason at all. He is said to have sought to import a legendary mad cannibal whose habit was to tear living men to pieces and then devour their flesh. Under Nero, such remarkable depravity spread into the population of Rome at large. Because of his penchant for throwing elaborate festivals and games, the degraded populace of Rome would often flock, as many as 50,000 at a time, to the circuses and amphitheaters to ogle at butchery and obscenity. Many times Nero himself would join in the performance, parading at center stage dressed as a clown or charioteer. To the applause of thousands, Nero and his performers would engage in barbaric acts of outright murder. An entire city, the capital of the known world, had gone mad. The morality of an entire culture, had been corrupted. It may have been the absolute low point of human history. It was into this hell that in 62 to 63 AD, Peter, returning to Rome, and Paul, now free from house arrest, descended in order to consolidate the gains of the new Christian church. The actual strength of the church in Rome during those years cannot be known. Probably at least 30,000 Jews resided in the city then, but what proportion of them had joined the Christian conspiracy is undetermined. A number of Gentiles had also become attached to the church. In Paul's epistle from Rome to the Philippians, written about this time, he greets the colony of the church in Philippi from the members of Caesar's household, Philippians 4:22, signifying that the Christians had penetrated into the very imperial palace itself. Only somewhat earlier, as the historian Tacitus records, a woman named Pomponia Graecina, the wife of Plautus, the Roman general who conquered Britain under Claudius, was accused of adhering to a foreign superstition that is now generally recognized to have been Christianity. Okay. In any case, what is certain is that amid the horror of Nero's Rome, the Christian movement gained rapidly among the remaining few who had managed somehow to hold on to their sanity. Not a few of the nobility were also won over to the new faith, and thousands of the common men and women. Under the circumstances, it is no exaggeration to assert that the Christian movement had become a political threat to Rome. The year 64 AD marks the turning point in Roman history. From that year onward, the chief preoccupation of the cult priests that controlled Rome and its empire would be the deadly combat with the Christian movement. In 64, a great fire swept through Rome. According to Tacitus, now started the most terrible and destructive fire Rome had ever experienced. It began in the Circus, where it adjoins the Palatine and Caelian hills. Breaking out in the shops selling inflammable goods and fanned by the wind, the conflagration instantly grew. There were no walled mansions or temples or any other obstructions which could arrest it. First, the fire swept violently over so scroll down. The level space swept over the level spaces. Then it climbed the hill, but turned to ravage the lower ground again. It outstripped every countermeasure. The ancient city's narrow, winding streets in irregular blocks encouraged its progress. Of Rome's 14 districts, only 4 remained intact. 3 were leveled to the ground. The other 7 were reduced to a few scorched and mangled ruins. The wealth and heritage of 5 centuries of Roman history had been wiped out. It is highly probable that the demented emperor set the fire himself. According to contemporary accounts, the population of Rome is said to have believed after the fire that Nero was behind it, and it was said that the emperor's slaves had been seen with torches and flammable material helping to spread the fire. Nero is recorded to have wanted to rebuild Rome in his image, and thus had first to destroy it. The enormous size of Nero's own palace had given rise to a popular verse that was sung in the streets of Rome, as recorded by Suetonius. The palace is spreading and swallowing Rome. Let's all flee to Veii and make it our home. Yet the palace is growing so damnably fast that it threatens to gobble up Veii at last. In the aftermath of the fire, to divert suspicion from himself, Nero sought a scapegoat on whom to blame the fire. Most likely the first target on which he would have blamed the catastrophe was the Jews, who were disliked by the Romans and mistrusted by the Roman officials. But the Jews themselves were split, many of them now secretly members of the Christian movement, led by Peter and Paul. According to many sources, the Jewish leaders still loyal to the empire, seeking to curry favor with Nero and to preserve themselves, went to the emperor and urged him to make the Christians the scapegoat for the fire. Nero agreed. The account of Tacitus, written about 100 AD, is as follows. But neither human resources nor imperial munificence nor appeasement of the gods eliminated sinister suspicions that the fire had been instigated. To suppress this rumor, Nero fabricated scapegoats and punished with every refinement the notoriously depraved Christians, as they were popularly called. The originator, Christ, had been executed in Tiberius' reign by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. But in spite of this temporary setback, the deadly superstition had broken out afresh, not only in Judea, where the mischief had started, but even in Rome. First, Nero had self-acknowledged Christians arrested. Then, on their information, large numbers of others were condemned, not so much for incendiarism as for their antisocial tendencies. What happened then marked a watershed in the history of Christianity. For the first time, the Christians themselves had been singled out for attack by the evil powers that ruled Rome. Nero, speaking to make a spectacle to divert the anger of the population, announced that the Christians would probably be punished in a theatrical ceremony. Systematically, the Christian leadership in Rome was arrested, rounded up, and herded into the amphitheater in the Imperial Garden on Vatican Hill, where St. Peter's Basilica stands now. Beginning with a long procession, men and women accused of being Christians were made to file into the center of the circus. Then, before tens of thousands of chanting and screaming Romans, the massacre began. First in small groups dressed in the skins of animals, the Christian leaders were subjected to attacks by wild beasts, lions, wild boars, wolves. They were torn apart and eaten. Then, in a perverse drama, Christians were forced to enact monstrous stories drawn from cult mythological legend. A modern historian describes it thus: a Hercules was carried to the funeral pyre and then burnt alive amid the frantic applause of the spectators. And Icarus was made to fly and then fall and be dashed to death. The hand of Mutius Scaevola was held in the burning brazier till the limb of the tortured sufferer was consumed. A Pasiphae was gored by a bull. A Prometheus was chained to a rock, where he underwent his terrible punishment. A Mariasus was flayed alive. An Ixion was tortured on his wheel. An Actaeon was actually torn by dogs. And still the slaughter went on into the night. As evening fell, 100 torches were lit to illuminate the carnage. And to the crowd's delight, it was noted that strapped to each torch was a human being drenched in oil. To this obscene light, the games went on until the blood-drenched floor of the circus could absorb no more. Now the Christians of the Roman Empire knew the full horror of what their enemy was. In less than a day, hundreds, perhaps thousands of Christians were eliminated. From that point on, the Christians were shown no mercy by the Roman secret police and the cult forces. Before Nero's death in 68 AD, 4 years later, the war claimed many more victims. Most prominent among them were two people who, more than anyone else, had been the force that shaped the formation of the early church: St. Peter and St. Paul. Peter was crucified upside down and Paul beheaded by the Roman authorities after having been arrested in their secret work among the remnants of the Christian movement, now driven deep underground. The first epistle of St. Peter, written immediately before his execution, is a moving tendency to the faith of the early Christians that they would eventually triumph. It contains advice to the faithful: be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. 1 Peter 5:8. The letter was signed by Peter from the church that is at Babylon. 1 Peter 5:13. Babylon, no longer even able to refer to Rome, the Christians called it Babylon, the ancient center of the evil cult worship, which has symbolized the decadence of Rome and its empire. With the start of the persecution, the Christian church was in shock. Its leadership had been decimated, and gradually the persecution spread into Asia Minor, Syria, Greece, and other parts of the realm. Officially, Christianity was outlawed, and membership in the sect was a capital crime. It was forced underground, and it adopted a code and secret symbols in order to survive. Christianity comes of age. The church had suffered a heavy blow. The death of Peter and Paul, its two greatest leaders, deprived the Christian movement of its guides and teachers. Let me get a sip of water here. Many of the original 12 apostles had long since passed away. The persecutions initiated by Nero were continued with only slight respite, more or less continuously, for the next 200 years. The new emperor Vespasian and his son and successor, Titus, had been the military commanders in the Jewish wars. Vespasian and Titus were of the infamous Flavian dynasty, which for centuries was the mainstay of the Egyptian cult of Isis in Rome. The new dynasty they established was one calculated to crush the newborn Christian movement in its infancy, using a sophisticated combination of utter ruthlessness and cleverness. Titus, for instance, was behind the brutal extermination policy against the Jews in Palestine, hoping thereby to eliminate both Jews and Christians in a final solution. But the Flavians also knew the tricks of that warfare, whose rules are within the domain of epistemology. Under their careful and cynical guidance, the pseudo-Christian cults of Gnosticism flourished and grew. Nevertheless, for a brief time after the death of the insane Nero, the immediate pressure on the Christian elite eased somewhat. The year was 68 AD. At about that time, St. John imprisoned on the Aegean island of Patmos off the coast of Asia Minor, was set free. John went to Ephesus, a major commercial city in Asia Minor, where he established a Christian academy which, for 30 years, produced a steady stream of priests and bishops who became the cadre of the Christian party. Thus, with the setback in Rome, the headquarters of the Christians shifted to Asia Minor, and Ephesus in particular. From that city, John functioned as the chief of staff for the conspiracy. Before he died at the ripe old age of about 100, he had created a network that guaranteed that the Flavian-backed cult of ISIS would not succeed in exterminating the Christian church. In fact, with the institution of the papacy, that is, the Bishop of Rome succeeding Peter as patriarch of the Christian family not yet established, it was John who provided the moral authority and intellectual direction through which the church grew. John taught using the authority of Jesus Christ himself, since he had been an apostle and disciple and had experienced the teaching of Jesus directly. His gospel, written some 20 or 30 years after those of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, was designed not merely as a historical account of Jesus' life, but it is a poetic masterpiece which elaborated the theology of the faith using explicit Neoplatonic methods. By a remarkable happenstance, the chief disciple of St. John, St. Polycarp, who was 2 generations younger than John, also happened to live until the age of 90 or more when he was martyred. And his leading student, the famous Irenaeus of Lyons, was, when he died about 177 AD, was about 100 years old. Thus, a mere 3 individuals, John, Polycarp, and Irenaeus, succeeding each other, were able to guide the Christian movement to a period more than 140 years after the death of Jesus of Nazareth. More than anything else, this ensured a continuity of doctrine and belief that prevented the fragmentation of the movement under the incredibly intense pressure of Roman oppression. The principle that these men established was that of the immortality of Jesus Christ. That well into the latter half of the 2nd century, Irenaeus could tell his students, "I knew Polycarp, who knew John, who knew Jesus, kept the direct experience of Christ and his teaching alive." Upon arriving in Ephesus about 70 AD, John was confronted with a major problem. For centuries, Ephesus had been the headquarters for the cult of the goddess Artemis. Together with its sister city, Corinth, Ephesus was one of the leading pagan centers in the world. The Temple of Artemis in Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was huge, more than 400 feet long and 200 feet wide, 60 feet high at its tallest point, and as a pagan historian wrote years later, by the grace of God and St. John the Divine, it became the most devastated and desolate of all. The cult of Artemis was a widespread infection, with branch temples ranging down into Rhodes in Egypt. At the enormous temple, the many priestesses were called bees, and the priests of the cult were eunuchs referred to as drones. And nearby Corinth, another temple contained more than 1,000 temple prostitutes who were referred to by the cult priestesses as girls of hospitality. Not surprisingly, men would often travel hundreds of miles to worship in the temple of Artemis at Corinth. During his 30 years at Ephesus, John's Christian Academy produced countless organizers and priests who would then emigrate to the Near East, North Africa, and Southern Europe, including Rome itself, to establish churches of the new faith. The enemies of the Christians, as already noted, took the form of both internal and external foes. Among the former, the Gnostics were the most virulent. The death of Simon Magus was earlier merely served to spawn other Gnostic viruses in other parts of the empire. The successor to Simon Magus was Menander, also a Samaritan and a disciple of Simon, who appeared in Antioch where, as Eusebius reports, he deceived many by the magical arts. Eusebius notes also that the name of Christian was adopted by such sorcerers to calumniate by magic the great mystery of religion. Against such charlatans, John polemicized. Bottom of the page. Okay. John polemicized often. Early church historians record one instance in which John, entering a public bathhouse to cleanse himself, encountered by chance a notorious rabble-rouser and Gnostic faker, Cerinthus. According to Polycarp, upon seeing Cerinthus, John leapt up and fled in mock terror from the house, exclaiming, "Let us flee, lest the bathhouse fall in, for Cerinthus, the enemy of truth, is within." Toward the end of the 1st century, as John neared his death, renewed persecutions broke out in various parts of the empire. Again arrested, John was transported back to Patmos, where he finally died. But just before his death, John reworked his revelation and gospel, sent letters to several local churches, and continued teaching until the end. With his death, the era of apostolic Christianity came to an end. The last Christian father to have actually seen and worked with Jesus had passed away. As Eusebius writes, "But when the sacred band of the apostles in the generation of those to whom it had been vouchsafed to hear with their own ears the divine wisdom had reached the several ends of their lives, then the federation of the godless took its beginning through the deceit of false teachers who, seeing that none of the apostles still remained, barefacedly tried against the preaching of the truth, the counter-proclamation, knowledge of knowledge, gnosis, falsely so called. At the same, the persecution was renewed with even greater intensity. Much of the persecution that the Christians faced at the time was in the form of what the Christians called popular risings, with the official government either not willing or not able to take direct actions against the now increasingly powerful Christian movement. The priests and priestesses of the cults would instead whip their followers into a frenzy and send them off in militia formation to attack the Christian churches and to murder the leaders of the faith. There is little recorded concerning the period of the early part of the 1st century. We know that it was a period of rapid and immense growth for the movement of Christianity. But there is precious little written evidence of the activities of the Christians during the period. Because of that, a remarkable historical document that has survived is the famous letter of Pliny the Younger to the Emperor of Trajan. Trajan, 98 to 117, was a careful and sophisticated ruler who reckoned soberly with the power of the Christian movement. Pliny, a Roman aristocrat, lawyer, landowner, and government official, was sent by Trajan into Asia Minor at the turn of the century on a special Roman commission to investigate the source of the bankruptcy and increasing public disorders that plagued the area. In a letter to Trajan, written approximately 112 AD, Pliny describes the problems of the Romans in dealing with the wretched cult of Christianity. Because of its fascinating insights into the state of the Christian movement and its relations to official Rome at the time, we reproduce it at length. Pliny to the Emperor Trajan. "It is my custom to refer to all difficulties to you, sir, for no one is better to resolve my doubts and to inform my ignorance. I have never been present at an examination of Christians. Consequently, I do not know the nature of the extent of the punishments usually meted out to them, nor the grounds for starting as an investigation and how far it should be pressed. Now, I am at all sure whether a pardon ought to be granted to anyone retracting his beliefs, or if he has once professed Christianity, he shall gain nothing by renouncing it, and whether it is the name of Christian, which is punishable, even if innocent of crime, or rather the crimes associated with the name. For the moment, this is the line I have taken with all the persons brought before me on the charge of being Christians. I have asked them in person if they are Christians, and if they admit it, I repeat the question a second and a third time, with a warning of punishment awaiting them. If they persist, I order them to be led away for execution." Pliny calls the emperor's attention to the rapid growth of the Christians, but wonders if a policy of persecution will not swell their number. I'm done. Okay.
That's a bit weird, right? I think I should have gone down.
Yeah, it's further down.
Yeah, I should have gone down. Yeah. Oops.
Yeah. Now that I have begun to deal with the problem, as so often happens, the charges are becoming more widespread and increasing in number. An anonymous pamphlet has been circulated, which contains the names of a number of accused persons. Amongst these, I considered that I should dismiss any who deny that they were or ever have been Christians when they had repeated after me a formula for invocation to the gods and had made offerings of wine and incense to your statue. Others, whose names were given to me by an informer, first submitted the charge and then denied it. They said they had ceased to be Christians 2 or more years ago, and some of them even 20 years ago. They all did reverence to your statue and the images of the gods and reviled the name of Christ. They also declared that the sum total of their guilt or error amounted to no more than this, that they had met regularly before dawn on a fixed day to chant verses alternately among themselves in honor of Christ as if to a god, and also to bind themselves by oath, not for any criminal purpose, but to abstain from theft and adultery, to commit no breach of trust, and not to deny a deposit when called upon to restore it. After this ceremony, it had been their custom to disperse and reassemble later to take food of an ordinary harmless kind, but they in fact had given this practice up since my edict issued on your instructions, which banned all political societies. This made me decide it was all the more necessary to extract the truth by torture from 2 slave women whom they called deaconesses. I found nothing but a degenerate sort of cult carried to extravagant lengths. Pliny then gets to the heart of his passage. The emperor must be aware that the Christians have spread so far and fast as to have, for a time, depopulated the cult temples, and thus, by their numbers, make it difficult and dangerous to persecute them. I have theretofore postponed any further examination and hastened to consult you. The question seems to be worthy of your consideration, especially in view of the numbers of persons endangered. For a great many individuals of every age and class, both men and women, are being brought to trial, and this is likely to continue. It is not only towns, but villages and rural districts, too, which are infected through contact with this wretched cult. I think it is still possible for it to be checked and directed to better ends, for there is no doubt that people have begun to throng the temples, which have been almost entirely deserted for a long time. The sacred rites which have been allowed to lapse are being performed again, and flesh of sacrificial victims is on sale everywhere. Though up until recently scarcely anyone could be found to buy it, it is easy to infer from this that a great many people could be reformed if they were given an opportunity to repent. Wow. How twisted is that? Usually repent is coming to Christ, not being turned away from Christ. All right. Responding, Trajan told Pliny that he followed the right course. He added, these people must not be hunted out. He proceeds to lay out a liberal policy of careful tolerance for anyone not directly proven to be a Christian. Thus was the church established like a brilliant lamp, wrote Eusebius later. The churches were now shining throughout the world, and faith in our Lord Jesus Christ was flourishing among all mankind, when the devil, who hates what is good as the enemy of truth, ever most hostile to man's salvation, turned all his devices against the church. Persecutions, he says, were combined with the use of wicked men and sorcerers to extend the Gnostic heresy. From Menander there came Saturninus, Basilides, and many other Gnostic cult priests calling themselves Christians. It was in this period following the death of St. John and the apostles that the Christian movement came of age. From a tiny band of followers of Jesus Christ, and now represented a force of hundreds of thousands, the apostles had succeeded, probably beyond their wildest dreams. They had forged a leadership that would prove more than capable of bringing to fruition what they had begun years before. Polycarp, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Clement, Quadratus, Aristides, Justin Martyr, the second generation of Christian leaders have been born. The vision of Philo Judaeus of Alexandria, a century before the teaching and crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, the mighty work of Peter and Paul, had permanently changed the course of world history. The men who emerged were true leaders, but unlike the earliest Christians, this generation could wield real political power, as the letter of Pliny reveals. The economic collapse that had begun long before Nero fed the discontent in the provinces, and the Christian churches became the rallying point for Roman populations no longer able to tolerate rule by the emperor's Empire's madman like Trajan and his successor Hadrian. Popular unrest was widespread, and the Christians effectively exercised enough power in certain areas to dissuade the empire from attempting a showdown. More than anyone else, the man who represented the leadership of the church in the 2nd century was Saint Polycarp. Born about 70 AD, Polycarp was raised in a Christian family. During his youth, he studied with Saint John at Ephesus, and he was about 30 years old when John died. About 107 AD, Polycarp began his public mission when he was appointed Bishop of Smyrna. For the next 50 years, amid many voyages around the Mediterranean from Smyrna, Polycarp strengthened and consolidated the gains of the first Christians. As an individual leader, Polycarp gained for himself the reputation of piousness and holiness, as well as great courage and intellectual genius. Many of his students became patriarchs of local churches in their own right. Irenaeus, the real founder of the Christian movement in France and continental Europe, who was Bishop of Lyons, was a disciple of Polycarp's academy at Smyrna. It was from Irenaeus in part that we learn of Polycarp's remarkable character. For instance, Irenaeus records a confrontation between Polycarp and Marcion, a Gnostic leader, and Polycarp himself also, when Marcion on one occasion encountered him, said, "Do you recognize me?" Polycarp replied, "Yes, yes, I recognize the firstborn of Satan." At the high point of his career, Polycarp earned the title Father of the Christians for his work in teaching the Christian message. The pagans viewed Polycarp as the man who single-handedly dethroned the gods and emptied the filthy temples of worshippers of evil. Very little of Polycarp's own writings have survived. Only a few letters and scattered fragments remain. In one letter written to a young friend, Polycarp writes, "The time requireth thee, as pilots require winds, or as storm-tossed mariner a haven, so that it may find God. Be sober as God's athlete."
Okay, so we're gonna make sausage and pepper sandwich, okay?
Okay. All right. Sorry, I got interrupted.
Sounds delicious.
It is fitting that we include in our story an account of Polycarp's martyrdom. It is one of the most moving and emotionally wrenching stories that have come down from the early Christian era. Like the death of Jesus more than 100 years before, Polycarp's death at the hands of the monstrous cult was not in vain, for it has served to inspire 100 generations since. His utterly uncompromising morality until the end. And his contempt for the pretensions of the Roman cults make the story of his martyrdom symbolic of the strength that, at one time or another, every real leader needs to summon up. The account that follows concerns the arrest and trial of Polycarp at the age of 86 during one of the periodic crackdowns on the Christians. Its authorship is attributed to a certain Marcion, obviously not the Gnostic previously encountered, but its authenticity is beyond doubt. We begin with the trial itself. As Polycarp stepped into the arena, there came a voice from heaven. "Be strong, Polycarp, and play the man." No one caught sight of the speaker, but those of our friends who were there heard the voice. Finally, he was brought forward for examination, and when the news spread around that it was Polycarp who had been captured, a deafening clamor broke out. He was brought before the governor, who asked if this was the man, and when Polycarp admitted to it, tried to persuade him to recant. "Have some respect for your years," he said, adding the rest of the usual with the infidels. Polycarp's brow.
Is that just me, or can other people also not see Rick or hear him?
Oh, I can't hear him either.
I can't hear him.
Okay.
Brow darkened.
Hey, Rick.
Look around the turbulent crowd in his
Rick?
hand, he said with a growl and glanced. Hill went on
Rick?
pressing him. "Take the oath." Polycarp's reply was, 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong.
Hey, Rick.
Oh, you can't hear?
You lost the connection for maybe not more than 10 seconds, 15 seconds.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that happened.
So how about you just review from interspersed?
Interspersed. Okay.
Oh no. Does
The
anybody
governor?
remember where a good place would be actually?
Down with the infidels?
When he talked about somebody from the crowd heard him say Polycarp name. How about that?
Where is that?
Early in the story, earlier, way earlier.
Way
Yeah.
earlier, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just
Or I thought he was brought before the governor. I think that's where we lost him a little bit.
It was, but
okay. Well, why don't we
I
do
don't
this, Helen? Would you like to read, because Rick's internet is a little bit shaky? So yeah, why don't you pick it up?
All right. So you want me to start at like finally he was brought forward for examination
That's
right
good.
there?
Yeah.
And when the news spread around that it was Polycarp who had been captured, a deafening clamor broke out. He was brought before the governor, who asked if this was the man. And when Polycarp admitted it, tried to persuade him to recant. Have some respect for your years, he said, adding the rest of the usual exhortations. Swear an oath by the luck of Caesar. Own yourself in the wrong and say, down with the infidels. Polycarp's brow darkened as he threw a look round the turbulent crowd of heathens in the circus, and then indicating them with a sweep of his hand, he said, with a growl and a glance to heaven, down with the infidels. The governor, however, still went on pressing him. Take the oath and I will let you go, he told him. Revile your Christ. Polycarp's reply was, 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How then can I blaspheme my king and my savior? Persisting in his attempts, the governor then said again, swear by the luck of Caesar. He answered, if you still think I am going to swear by Caesar's luck and still pretend not to know who I am, let me tell you plainly, now that I am a Christian. And if you want to know the meaning of Christianity, you have only to name a day and give me a hearing. To this, the governor's reply was, try your arguments on the crowd yonder. The governor then said, I have wild beasts here. Unless you change your mind, I shall have you thrown to them. Why then call them up, said Polycarp, for it is out of the question for us to exchange a good way of thinking for a bad one. It would be a very credible thing, however, to turn over from the wrong to the right. And all the time he was saying this and much else besides, he was overflowing with courage and joy, and his whole countenance was beaming with grace. It was not only that he was anything but prostrated with dismay at the threats which were uttered. It was the governor who, on his part, found himself now completely at a loss. What he did next was to send his crier to give out 3 times from the center of the arena. Polycarp has admitted to being a Christian. At the crier's words, the whole audience, the heathens and Jewish residents of Smyrna alike, broke into loud yells of unforgivable fury.
Ungovernable.
Ungovernable fury. That teacher of Asia, that father figure of the, I don't know what that word is. It's kind of blocked out.
Christians.
The father, okay, of the Christians, that destroyer of gods, who is teaching whole multitudes to abstain from sacrificing to them or worshiping them. Interspersed with this, there were loud demands for the Asiarch Philip to let loose a lion at Polycarp. However, he told them that the rules would not allow him to do this, since he had already declared the beast fighting closed. Whereupon they decided to set up a unanimous outcry that he should have Polycarp burnt alive. But even as Polycarp died, his student Irenaeus in the French city of Lyons was already constructing another academy, teaching more Christian philosophers and theologians. In Rome, the 10th successor of Peter, Pope Pius I, was reigning over a secret but powerful congregation that included increasing numbers of the Roman elite, the army, and the common man as Christian communicants. A revolution was underway. No document more captures the spirit of the time than the famous and beautiful revelation of St. John, or the Apocalypse, the final book in the New Testament, written sometime between AD 70 and 100. John, who survived the persecution, express in it the mute horror that gripped the Christian movement in the wake of Nero's persecution and the calamities of that decade. Cast as a vision, the revelation contains innumerable secret references, symbols, and codes, most of which were readily identifiable to the Christian inner elite of the period. Today, most historians agree that the monster or beast, which appears repeatedly in the Revelation, is none other than Nero himself. The following passage, among the most powerful ever written, needs no further introduction. And there came of the 7 angels that had the 7 veils, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-covered beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious jewels and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornications. And upon her forehead was the name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, i.e., the 7 hills of Rome. The waters which thou sawest were where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the woman which thou sawest is the great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. The majesty of that description of the whore of Babylon, of the evil of the great city of Rome, captured the solemn anger of the Christian movement. Then later in the Revelation, John describes the vision of the future where the beast and the whore of Babylon have been defeated. At that point, descending out of heaven, John envisions the perfect city, the rebuilt Jerusalem. The blood of the Roman army's slaughter has been washed away, and emerging is the city of God. There is no mysticism involved. John simply describes the world that must be. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall swipe away the tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. But the fearful and unbelieving, the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake that burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And the angel carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of the heaven from God. Revelation 21, 1-10. Epilogue. Let us permit ourselves, from the vantage point of the middle of the 2nd century, a glimpse into the future. A mere 50 years later, when the death of Polycarp was still fresh in the memory of his successors, the movement that was founded by Jesus had reached the point where it was now capable of making an open bid for power. On the eve of that occasion, the situation was described stirringly by Tertullian, in his Apologeticus, written as an open letter to the emperor, in which Rome is warned about the power of the Christian movement. For if we wish to play the part of open enemies and not merely hidden avengers, should we lack the power that numbers and battalions give? Oh, of course, the Moors, the Marcomanni, yes, and the Parthians, and any other race as great as you please, but of one region with their own frontiers, are more numerous than the race which covers the world. But we are but of yesterday, and we have filled everything you have: cities, islands, forts, towns, exchanges, yes, and camps, tribes, and disseries, palace, senate, forum, and we have left to you.
All we have left to you.
All we have left to you is your temples. We can count your troops. The Christians of one province will be more in number. For what war should we not have been fit and ready, even if unequal in numbers? We who are so glad to be butchered, were it not, of course, that in our doctrine we are given ampler liberty to be killed than to kill. Why, without taking up arms, without rebellion, simply by standing aside, by mere ill-natured separation, we could have fought you. For if so vast a mass of people as we had broken away from you and removed to some recess of the world apart, the mere loss of so many citizens of whatever sort would have brought a blush to your rule. Yes, that it would, and punished you by sheer desertion. Beyond doubt, you would have shuddered at your solitude, at the silence in the world, the stupor, as it were, of a dead globe. You would have had to look about for people to rule. You would have had more enemies left than citizens. For as things are, you have fewer enemies because of the multitude of Christians, when nearly all the citizens you have in nearly all of the cities are Christians.
There we go. Then we have a that's the end. That's the end. And then there's a chronology, which people can look through on their own to help as a scaffold in the mind of the story that we read. And then the footnotes. So yeah, we did it. That was the essay. And I like the fact that he ended with that next phase, sort of like a cliffhanger in a sense, as a drama. But it's especially, I think, relevant now with times that we're living through, that we know, looking at the situation in the Middle East, how there are definitely many fanatics, especially made possible by the rise of the political Zionist Christian end times movement that really burst onto the scenes in the early 19th century. Ironically, by a bunch of Anglican British intelligence operatives who put the most work into driving this thing forward. There's a tendency to really misread things like the Book of Revelation and just take things out of context with no sense or no concern about the actual time in which John was writing, who he was writing to, what he was referring to. And there's enough evidence, if you just read if you think about what is knowable about that history, and you think about what is actually in this very metaphorical language of the Whore of Babylon, this multi-headed beast, and the battle of Gog and Magog, and all of that stuff, he's very clearly referencing Nero, and I mean that period of debauchery in Rome. And people just tend to see it as something to do with the future that needs to happen, and that we have to do God's will by being instruments of that end times prophecy to be good Christians, which somehow involves bringing in hellfire onto the Middle East and the broader world to make Jesus come back. It's insane. So I do appreciate that he ended it on that note. What do you guys think? I saw Ken, I saw Rick lift their digital hands. There aren't too many of us, so we don't have to, I don't think, be too rigid in raising hands and putting our names in the chat box. But yeah, Ken, what do you have in your mind? Oh, everyone's kind of on mute, I think. Ken, you're on mute. So are you, Rick. Oh, Rick.
Okay.
Why don't you go for it?
Well, yes, there's so many thoughts I have. First thought is, that part where it says, "We shall be changed." I recommend anyone to listen to Handel's Messiah, where they sing that and they lower the voice. It's really beautiful. So it's like a spiritual experience. You really get the feel of that in Handel in the Messiah, where it's like, "We shall be changed," I've been thinking a lot about time, about the organization of time, about how we have in the atheist, Darwinist, Malthusian, science, standard model Newtonian thing. We have the heat death, right? We have the end of all history with the heat death, where everything just kind of mushes together into this equilibrium. But there's this apocalypse of climate change and global warming. And then in the popular Christian interpretation of end times revelation, how we need to bring about the beast, we have there's an apocalypse, and then there's an antichrist who comes to power, who installs a microchip in everybody, and then after that there's a rapture, or during that time there's a rapture, and then the good guys go up to Jesus to sing harps with him for eternity in a state of no change. And the bad guys go to hell for all eternity in a state of no change, and it's the end of history. And so, there's like in the bad interpretation of Revelation, or the interpretation of what you're talking about, both of them, the atheist thermodynamic heat death and the static Christian view of fundamentalist evangelicals, kind of both brings you to the end goal is a state of eternal no change. And the end of history. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I really like what you've been saying on other podcasts, Matt, about the Darby, and the false doctrines, and about how it almost kind of gives you a sense that what you're talking about the city of God and the kingdom of heaven and the end of empire. Sounds to me in the perfection of the human race toward a more perfect union through high technology and the use of our creativity is like a positive thing where we must deserve to inherit the Messiah as a planet by being good, by building something positive, versus the other side, the side that I'm talking about, the fundamentalist evangelical popular end times version we hear today, that we have to bring about, that the more evil there is and the more destruction there is and the more violence there is, the more Christians in this interpretation almost kind of shout with glee and are happy and overjoyed, like they want it to happen. Or
it's an acceptance, you're saying.
What?
It's an acceptance.
Yeah, not just acceptance. It's almost like an exuberant anticipation, and then when you get higher up. What's that?
Oh, sorry. They see it as a sign that, okay, now it's coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a call to action.
But then when you go higher up into the neocons and some of the the people pulling the strings behind what's going on, they're almost manifesting and making it happen, like trying to expedite Judgment Day or something.
It's a real fucked up Pygmalion effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a good observations, Rick. And I don't know. Do you ever write? Let me ask you. Do you ever write your thoughts out in the form of articles or anything like that? Because what you said you sent me something.
I've written emails to you. I don't know if you got.
Well, I was thinking more about because what you said about Francis Fukuyama's thesis of the end of history, and Fukuyama is a radical transhumanist atheist, but it's a rich irony that there's so many similarities to this particular perversion of Christianity that's done so much damage and has really found itself behind the neocon takeover of the Republican Party over the last few decades. to the point that we just have like this convergence of these 8 hardcore radical transhumanist atheists believing in the end times utopia of just no change, and then the the fundies on the other side, all kind of like falling into the same beat frequency. That's a great concept to unfold or unpack in an article or an editorial piece. So if you ever wanted to write something,
I would like to write that.
I would publish that, just so you know.
Great. I've even coined a phrase, Christian nihilism. And Christian nihilism is the idea that because end times is because the destruction of the earth by fire and nuclear war is unavoidable, and the coming of the beast, this antichrist, is going to install a chip in everybody's arm since that's unavoidable, it doesn't really matter. It's just the world's going to burn up anyway. We should just wait for Christ to come. It doesn't. We shouldn't bother building roads and bridges and highways. We shouldn't bother to try to improve human life. We should just sit back and eat our popcorn and wait for Judgment Day. Clap and
just accept it, and then you're being complacent, and that they love that.
Would it be fair to say that? And I'm asking a question. It's a difference between belief and faith. That belief permeates a certain type of sorcery even within the fundamentalist movement, which means that it isn't necessarily in touch with reality, whereas faith is a more platonic concept.
I think that gets into semantics a little bit, because
never mind
how you're thinking, and that will shape the word belief and faith. I mean, from my standpoint, I think that whole conversation would be getting us riskily into the domain of semantics a bit too much.
Okay,
but I see how you're thinking, and I do appreciate that. But I see Ken figured out how to get his mic off of mute. Ken, are you still there?
At last, yes. Man, I wanted to ask you a question because I think you're most likely to have the answer, but can you give us a little color background on the provenance of this piece? Who commissioned it? What the thinking was behind writing it in the first place, and anything you know about any of the authors?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about Robert Dreyfuss, except that he did write. At the time he was a writer or researcher with EIR. Worked very closely with Lyndon LaRouche in the late 70s. This was written in 1980. And there was a series of reports that were commissioned at this time by LaRouche. The previous ones were a 2-part series called The Truth About Plato, to sort of introduce the geopolitical topography and the battle of ideas in ancient Athens about 500 years or several hundred years before Plato came onto the scene, and a couple hundred years afterwards. I think it ends with Alexander's murder. Really good, thorough piece, and this was supposed to be a follow-up to that, to sort of do the similar exercise in regarding the story as we read. Robert Dreyfuss, I know, did a few really good pieces that I've read. There's a book called Hostage to Khomeini that in hindsight probably has some fallacies to it in 1982 or so, but it's an otherwise very good resource piece in terms of some of the subtleties influencing the Iranian Revolution behind the scenes, which even to this day, very few people talk about. But he did a pretty good job there. I think he's a little bit too much pro the Shah, and doesn't see he's got rosy tinted glasses in that book when he looks at the Shah. But overall, it's, like I said, it's a very good piece. So that's what I know about Robert Dreyfuss per se. I don't know much else.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Satomi. Oh yes, Satomi, you're on mute.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, sorry I came in the middle. I was in a meeting, but
Sure.
And then I'm going to read the other, meeting I missed. So I made the I should have gone and reviewed it, but I think what I want to say is that, like, who was the other speaker before? Oh, Rick. That are you kind of, when you talk about revelation, are you kind of talking about the false narrative of the revelation? Because as far as, when I read Revelation, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's not the revelation of the Antichrist and the beast. Like, it's a restoration. It's a whole heaven on earth. I kind of don't see where you're getting your information.
Oh, can I answer?
Yeah, of course.
Well,
Directed towards you.
well, well, I was listening to this guy, who's quoting, who said his book is the best eschatology book out there, and he was given all this breakdown through Isaiah and Daniel and Revelation about who the beast is, where he's going to come from, and he's talking about how Russia's going to go to war with Turkey, and they're going to invade Israel, and going into all these specifics about and talk about Neom, and these people, like, I call it scripture nerdism, where they start to It's kind of like what Jesus accused the Pharisees of being, by the letter of the law, or Sadducees. I mean, the letter of the law, not the heart of it. Where they get really into the technicality of Daniel and Revelation, and they start, talking about trying to pinpoint when the end is going to be, and so the Revelations 13 describes a beast rising out of the sea. It's basically very descriptive of Nero, but it talks about this person who would be a dictator and be very evil and proclaim himself as Christ, but be of the devil, like to deceive people.
But there are many antichrists that have come, like in the sense of that a doctrine, contrary to what Jesus was teaching and his revelation. Yeah. So there have been many, and there may be one, but I think we're quite far off from that. There are so many. We still need to. There's a whole restoration that must take place, and that's why Jesus Christ in Revelation, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ, and he's not a destroyer. He came like the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but like Jesus says, I have come to bring you life and life abundant.
Yeah.
So
right. Oh yeah. What I'm talking about, when I was talking about, I wasn't saying Revelation is perverted. I was saying that there's a perverted doctrine of Revelation popularized by false teachers out there. So,
yeah, he was referring specifically to the work of like John Nelson Darby that gave rise to all of these really strange end times cultists who really are not doing justice to the word of in the Bible. And I think people who interpret it the way you do and relate it to it the way you do are much healthier, because you don't see that it's our there's no extra set of logical actions that your mind can possibly take. So a moral person like you, Satomi, or people who are of your epistemological current, who would think that it is somehow God's will that they be instruments for destruction to usher in a situation where the Christ will come.
I'm
you
not
don't
saying
think that. Right?
You reap what you sow, and there is, but I also too, light exposes darkness, and and that's why the more darkness, there's more revelation coming. There's I always sort of see that, like, wow, we're really on the edge of some kind of truly a reformation and a restoration with all this happening. I mean, of course, we have to keep our feet on the ground and act locally, do our part, whatever our part is. We need to do that. But like, I was just at a poetry reading yesterday, and it was just hearing some of the beauty of the powerful thing of poetry, and just like, in that whole positive, like, I was just reading, like, just this morning, Shalom, this artist, this was after 9/11, these Makato was saying we need artists to give us a vision of their Shalom vision, and things like that. Like, we have to keep that balance. That's all I'm saying. Just like, I'm so glad that I went to that poetry reading, just to keep that balance. Well, of course, that, Matthew, and I really enjoyed your Khazarian alliances with that you put yesterday, I think, or today.
Thank you.
Oh, that was so
that's a big story.
good.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, just to keep us with that those possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, No, definitely. It's good to definitely feed the soul with more than simply news feeds, and to get into universal history and poetry is very important. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm saying we need it too. We need that hard truth, but we need the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, you've been waiting there for a bit. How you doing?
Okay, so I was just wondering, okay, so this whole reading and this whole thing, I guess what I'm saying is this is Christianity to be taken kind of like the Reformed Jews take the Old Testament, as just like, stories to keep you on the straight and narrow?
I don't know. I mean, are you asking like how we should, based on what this essay was
Based on what
about?
we just read, is this just to say that that Christianity is just just I don't know, stories to keep you on the straight and narrow, just like Reformed Judaism is,
Right.
because there's different kinds of Judaism, and and some are more literal, and
Huh. Well, this is, I think, from the author's standpoint. What I like about the author is he's speaking from a universalist standpoint, but in a way that is accessible to people, even if they're not Christian. They could still read this paper and be edified and be more united, or see themselves in others. And I think with that comes a greater ability to appreciate the dynamics shaping the human story more, because if we are too prejudiced in just our personal matrix, and if a lot of people coming at a study of politics or the past, or especially if they're religious, they tend to have implicitly a certain sense, which can be a bit unhealthy, of superiority complex over those who don't subscribe to the exact particular same faith, right? Whatever denomination of Christian they are, they think that theirs is going to be kind of the best, or if you're, so that puts you in a bit of an unhealthy place in relationship to other people, especially if they're coming at you from, or another part of the world, giving God a different name or something. And this paper I just found is a good way, in a healthy way, of both praising Christianity for the great good that it is, and at the same time giving people a space where they can appreciate Judaism and other cultures that recognize certain truths, like we're made in the image of God, that God is a loving God, a reasonable God, that we can participate in that creation that of God's works that we're a part of. So anybody who does that, you'll find that if they're Hindu or Buddhist or Confucian or Muslim or Jew or whatever, Protestant or Catholic, if they start from that standpoint, everything kind of falls into place a lot better, and we find peace processes occur. We build trust with people who are different from us. And so this author seems to have done a pretty good job of advancing his own mind in that direction. So I like that. And what I want to do as well, I think I was talking to a couple of people earlier today, and we're introduced to the figure of Philo, and I think what'll be cool is maybe next week or the week after we can begin a study over 4 or 5 reading sessions of Philo's famous work on creation, his Timaeus, as sort of an introduction to some Jewish Platonic humanism, and then maybe we could follow that up with something from either Ibn Sina or a great Platonic humanist Muslim scholar who wrote something beautiful, maybe then something by Augustine on the free choice of the will. I think as far as helping people to appreciate the truth that we've all been sort of zeroing in on in our own way, and that's been suppressed by oligarchical Satanists and, masquerading as Muslims or as Jews or as Christians over the centuries. I think that'll be a fun exercise as well. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
I have another, has anybody, so I read this book, Caesar's Messiah, and I was just wondering if anybody has an opinion on it, or, because it really definitely, I don't think it fits into this particular story. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they're just
that Caesar created the story of Jesus for better controls.
I think it's more like Vespasian or Titus, maybe, not necessarily. Of course, he was Caesar. Yes, Caesar.
Yeah, that definitely
it's known
doesn't
as the
fit into
the
this.
Flavian conspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah, that certainly doesn't
And
fit
look,
into this.
you'll find an enormous amount of evidence on this one in various academic institutions that have like religious studies as a strong part of their curriculum. That there is very little historical evidence that proved Christ ever existed. That you can mount an argument that a lot of what is written about him is a creation, a deliberate creation, the Flavian creation. This one can go so far, and I've seen pretty good evidence to this effect, that in fact Paul himself is a creation, and that Paul is in fact Josephus.
Oh man, no.
Look, from my analysis of things, I don't think that that's a very there is definitely a long-standing agenda to take control of all of academia and to introduce a Gnostic interpretation of Christianity in order to undermine and undo what was.
I'm not promoting that philosophy, Matthew. I'm a bit of a fence sitter on this one. There's good evidence on either side as far as I'm concerned, or at least evidence that would, cause you to stop and think.
I know there's evidence for flat Earth too, and
that
the Earth is in the motion. There's evidence for all sorts of things.
I think the title of the book is the Zealot by a guy named Reza Islam, but that was the first one that I came across, which kind of led me to look into some of the stuff that was on offer online and everything like that. And as I say, I think that's what's being referred to here, and it does have some legs.
Paul, don't you think that this one makes more sense as far as just about as far as goodness and keeping people on the straight and narrow, you know what I'm saying, and accountable and stuff like that, because the Caesar's Messiah one was a little bit, some things I think, I don't know, they looked good.
A bit too contrived.
Huh?
Yeah, I mean, a bit too contrived. It almost reeks too much of a conspiracy that's been put in there to seem like a conspiracy. It's an interpretation. Yeah. It's an interpretation of the supposed evidence, and that's the bit that your attention is drawn to the fact that there really is little historical evidence of what was supposedly going on at the turn of the millennium, etc., etc. That if Christ really did exist in a world where the Romans were anal in record keeping and very, very capable as record keepers, there should be more historical evidence. Now, the same thing turns out in terms of the origins of the Muslim religion. And I agree with Matthew that all of this research and the capture of academia seems to be leading down a certain path. Now, like I said, I'm a fence sitter. I don't want to draw conclusions in either direction until I see more evidence. Although I lean in the direction, I'm more of a conspiratorial thinker. I lean more in the direction that there's an awful lot of obfuscation going on here, and some of it seems to be deliberate.
Well, there's definitely obfuscation, that's for sure. Hey, Quan,
my whole take on what we've just been through, the reading of the what is it, reading 4 now? What we've been reading is a commentary on politics. Christianity didn't just suddenly erupt for no reason. There's an enormous amount of political background to the development of Christianity, and why, in the face of the sheer brutality and ugliness, which was hard to read about sometimes, folks, I have to say, really hits me in the heart. The cruelty, the sheer, the abominations. In the face of that, Christianity offered an alternative that eventually won out, but it wasn't entirely just the ideas themselves. It took a lot of political effort to get those ideas to coalesce, and I'm talking about both the Christian message and a certain amount of Platonic messaging as well from Philo, etc., etc. There's an awful lot of politics, just like there is in the world around us today. A lot of agendas in play.
Sure, absolutely. Quan?
Well, I have to say that when I read those things, I'm absolutely amused, because since I read Chinese, I read a lot of stuff in the Buddhist domain or in the Taoist domain, which resemble a lot of those storytelling. because once again, I repeat myself, but that's the root of the reality. For a lot of people who are underdeveloped epistemologically speaking, they are thirsty for that kind of story. And it is an absolutely outstanding instrument to corral them into different sections of the society, even using different brands of the dispensationalist theology, of the covenant theology, or of different novels offering exciting versions of what could have happened 2000 years ago. And I have to say that there's no possibility to go against those mythology than a higher epistemological development, because I come back once again to my distinction between facts with a measure, truth, which is the epistemological development, and mythology, or the real. Okay, because I give to mythology the very strong word, the real, because it can act on space-time reality. And once again, mythology, or the real, is the privilege of the ruling class. And if you have a kakistocratic ruling class, you have all kind of amusing, from my standpoint, storytelling. But those amusing storytelling could have tragic consequences. So it's too bad that you guys don't read Chinese, because you could have a lot more stories telling by reading the Taoist corpus or the Buddhist corpus. And nothing is more interesting than universal history, because the same stuff that we find in those variants of Christianity, well, the major themes are the same in Buddhism or in Taoism. I would say that I'm not proposing here that all nations should copy the Chinese government, but the Chinese government has a commission, a national commission called the Bureau for Religious Affairs, and that Bureau for Religious Affairs is responsible to read all the fantasies which are produced on end time stories, on different kind of theology, and gods know that it's very rich in the Taoist world and the Buddhist world, and to ask them to register themselves at the Central Bureau in Beijing, so they can amuse themselves and amuse the population. But the central government is perfectly aware of their activities.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely important for people. Like I like the fact that you differentiated facts from truth, and then you have, I mean, because people, they tend to scramble it all together, right? And they think of somehow literal facts as being co-equal to truth, and no, facts are just, huh?
And the real is very important, because the real is the kingdom of mythology, of fairy tales, and of narratives, if we want to use a technical word.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's sort of like, I guess, the space for the mind to learn how it works, so that the mind can learn to judge the difference between a simple fact versus truth, which requires a sensitivity to nuance, to be able to recognize poetic metaphor, to be able to to recognize it in a way that that you could see when it emerges lawfully versus when it emerges unlawfully. Because like the oligarchy also manages the world through stories and myths and storytelling, and you get that just by looking at Hollywood movies, right? Like we just watched Oppenheimer last night. It's a very immersive story. It's very engaging, full of
mythology. That's
pure poison, toxicity, lies that'll make but powerful stuff. And inversely, if you're a good person who wants to make people better, you will be able to use your sense of storytelling as a writer, as an artist, to be able to give people better insights into how their mind works, what human nature is, what the truth is, but you do it through story. You can't just give people a didactic, literal sermon and have them all of a sudden change for the better.
Yes, and once again, mythology is not bad, okay? Because once again, if you have the right epistemological level, you will read the narratives with amusement because it's a kind of novel. Right. And for example, Caesar's Messiahs is very interesting. Da Vinci Code is very interesting, etc. And if you read the book I don't know if you guys read the very thick
Holy Blood, Holy Grail,
Holy Blood,
yes.
Holy Grail by Lincoln and two other authors. Well, it is absolutely entertaining, and for someone interested in history, it's outstanding. Okay, but you have to make the difference between those stuff to be truly entertained and not to be patsies in some manipulations by the oligarch. Because let's not forget the facts, the truth, and the real. And the real, the mythology making, is the privilege of the ruling class, and it will always be the privilege of the ruling class because they have the means to propagate their perception of reality. Yeah. And if you don't have an aristocratic ruling class, you wouldn't have bullshit that will be given to you.
Right. You know what? Actually, based on what you just said and what Ken asked earlier regarding why was this or what was the context in which this current essay by Dreyfus was written, it was actually when LaRouche commissioned this study, he had just published The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites, which is a fantastic 1978 essay on the Neoplatonic, like the Platonists clashing with the Aristotelians and the different representatives representing either faction or worldview over the centuries. Really solid. And one of the points that really struck me was within that text, LaRouche had made this point that both sides, the Platonic elite and the Aristotelian elites over the years, have both deployed the use of storytelling and myth making to advance either conception of the way that the world should be, right? Where the one hand obviously has the idea of a city of God, a city of justice here on earth that we make happen through our tapping into our better selves. And so the stories told by a Dante or a Jonathan Swift or a St. Augustine would enhance our ability to be that best person as an instrument of God's goodwill and grace that we could be ourselves, versus the other side, which pulls us more into the shadows of the cave, right? As sensualist creatures inclined to lose control of our own destiny. And he made the point that the greatest Achilles heel of the oligarchy is that over time, while both sides generate myths, the oligarchy ends up believing their own myths. And thinking about Holy Blood, Holy Grail, I was reminded that if you think about Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth or even the current coronation of King Charles III, there's a lot, like they're being doused, sprinkled with water from the Jordan. There's a wooden chair that they sit upon that has remnants from like what's apocryphally discussed as Solomon's temple. There's this story that's been crafted that as the Holy Blood, Holy Grail goes through, that the Grail itself in the course of that study is the bloodline of the illegitimate child of Jesus and Mary Magdalene that's been protected by a secret order over the centuries. And it's actually called the British Israelite cult. I mean, there's all of the royals believe that they themselves are the direct descendant of Jesus, and they kind of live into it. And there's this this tendency to over time, maybe when it was first being created as a story, it was being done for certain geopolitical purposes, and it continued to have geopolitical effects, obviously very important ones. But after a couple of generations pass, all of a sudden, those heirs of those family bloodlines end up starting to believe that stuff and live into it. And again, it becomes a bit of a weird Pygmalion effect in its own way.
Yeah.
The Freemasonry picks all that stuff up and follows the Merovingian bloodline as this supposed bloodline connection with Jesus and so forth, and wants to see the ultimate reinstatement of the King of Jerusalem, blah blah blah. From this, it's all very relevant to what you're saying, Matt.
Well, I'm just thinking about this. It kind of came to me while I was speaking to Jason Dahl. He has a podcast, and we were just talking and going through some of this. And I've been sort of going through a lot of the same material again and again. So I'm trying to figure out new ways of looking at it. And while I was talking, it kind of dawned on me that there's something in the Anglican. The Church of England is probably one of the weirdest of the churches of all of the different splintered factions of Christianity. That's probably the weirdest one, with the reigning hereditary monarch as the head of the church, as the church pope, right? And
it was founded on libido, Matt. It was founded on libido.
Yeah,
and Charles is the perfect representative and inheritor of that tradition, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, the guy wants to be a Templar.
Look, I can't help it, Matthew. After this line of conversation, I just have this wicked image in my head of the look on Charles's face if he found himself lashed to a cross.
Yeah, but let's not forget that all that big adventure began as a plunder of the properties of the church by Henry VIII after his marital problems. And to a certain extent, how can I say it? But if we see in the past, most of the great sovereigns were seen as the sacred persons. Okay, and it's very easy for a sovereign to push to the forefront the sacredness of his reality. But once again, I don't necessarily mind that a sovereign would push forward the sacredness of his person, because there is a sacredness in the person of sovereign, but at the condition that the sovereign is an aristocratic man. Okay, the problem begins when there is a deep chasm between the inner reality or the epistemological development of the sovereign and his pretensions.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing I was just thinking about, though, I agree with you. Like, if a sovereign actually walks the walk and has the mandate of heaven, okay. But in the case of Henry VIII, it's kind of openly known more broadly that he created this church for, purely sexual reasons, mostly, and for himself. Now, he himself didn't have the geopolitical insight to know what was around him or influencing him. But when you look into it, there's this figure.
It's a fellow named Zorzi.
Yeah, Francesco Zorzi, right? And Zorzi is really Webster Tarpley, because I was having a hard time finding source material, but it actually is there. And Zorzi was the guy providing him the legal justification using the Old Testament of why it would be okay to get the divorce, and if the Pope should not allow it, then you can set up your own church. And the other guy, Thomas Cromwell, who's also an accountant working for a Venetian merchant, is the guy who's then set up to bring in the actual Church of England in 1535, which Thomas More is totally against. That's a big reason why More's not so much against him getting divorced. He's against him splintering, like doing something that's going to break an alliance with Spain, right? Shatter this, potentially usher in forever wars, not only with Spain now that you had an alliance with earlier on, that with Catherine of Aragon, but then also splinter the church and unleash more wars within, after you already had, the Luther break with it already earlier on. Now you're going to do it again. So he had to get his head cut off. And again, you got these Kabbalist freaks like Zorzi, the Venetian operative, who's like founding Rosicrucianism as we know it. That's Zorzi, the guy who's writing the harmonies of the world. Just a couple of years before he's advising Henry VIII to do this. And you got Ignatius Loyola, same time, right, that this is happening. You got Loyola going through his spiritual awakening and being discovered in St. Mark's Square by this high-level Venetian I forgot which family member this guy's from, but such a high level operative in Venice who discovers Ignatius Loyola on pilgrimage to the Holy Land in Jerusalem, and like brings him to the Doge and cleans him up and gives him tons of money to make his pilgrimage happen. And both are set up in 1535, the same year. He's got the Kabbalist Venetian, operatives setting up the intelligence agency operations inside of England that becomes Rosicrucianism, that becomes the United Grand Lodge of Freemasonry right afterwards. At the same time as Venice is tied to the creation of the Jesuit order. At the same friggin' time in France, before it even gets set up in Spain, it's in France. So all of this is happening, and it's a fascinating story that seems to be very much tied to the creation of the Darbyites, Lord Shaftesbury groupings within the Anglican Church that are bringing Christian Zionism into being as we know it, at least in the current time. It's wild stuff.
But those are the dominant themes of what I would call political religious tools. So and don't be surprised that they come back again and again and again. But I have a short conclusion to offer. I think that a lot of what the West was suffer in the past and is suffering nowadays is because of the absence of a Bureau of Religious Affairs. I think that the Western government should set up a Bureau of Religious Affairs.
I think so too. Maybe our country was founded on that principle with the separation of church and state.
Well, you need to have a cultural level that could produce a lot of high quality moral people to manage something so powerful, right? A Bureau of Religious Affairs requires.
Absolutely. Because you have to be sure that the people in the Bureau of Religious Affairs would not set them up as a kind of new mythology makers.
Yeah, that could get super fascist super fast.
Yeah.
It even sounds a little like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, can I just say something?
Yeah, Satomi, then Susan, then Rick. Yeah. Satomi, yeah, sure.
Oh, me?
Well, yeah,
Susan.
So sure, yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I was just saying something that you brought up, Matthew, about the, King Charles. Like, they really do believe, they believe it. And I was actually looking for this note that I found when I think back in James I, he had a ruling come in where the king is now the rule, took over the sovereignty of the Pope. That was, and I'm trying to get more, I can't, because my memory isn't that good. And I know I wrote it down somewhere. And because I just recently was listening about, did you know anything about that? King James I, he brought that, got that changed so that the right of rule is now in the hands of the kings. And so maybe that's where now King Charles, they've got their eyes on, on the throne in Jerusalem. But I don't know if you had known of that ruling that
no, it's not.
Maybe the Anglicans, maybe they were the ones that instituted.
I'm pretty sure you are correct, Satori, that it was James that codified it, but I think the practice was pretty much from the time of Henry. Seemed to be the head of the church. But James codified it. There might have been a bit of a battle going on. I'm not sure what preceded it, but James, I'm pretty sure you're correct, was the one who fought Parliament off and codified more power under the monarch.
So there is that. I don't know, but I just kind of was, when I heard that, I was thinking, oh my gosh, because I know King Charles is, I'm just reading the Greening, and I know what King Charles is up to, Have you guys read that book by Larry Abraham?
The Greening?
The Greening.
The Greening is simply the name by Larry.
The Greening. Greening. Yeah,
no,
the Greening.
No. Could you send out a link that?
Yeah, I will, because that's pretty amazing. That's our paradise.
And it's sort of like a bio of King Charles III.
No, this one is the green, like how the Iron Mountain report, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. And that next step, like there's this kind of stages. And so they're setting up this next step for the environment. And then, of course, King Charles has always been about environment.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Absolutely.
Right. It just sort of seems so convenient that he's now king.
Yeah. And you have I think with the Jesuit Pope as well, with that whole greening of Christianity that's also been really pushed forward heavily since 2013. That's sort of a convergence, a very clear convergence, right, of this Anglican and Jesuit greening of Christianity from different directions into a converged place, which ultimately idealizes the greatest good and divine that we could be and do would be to just not change anymore and go back to the Garden of Eden before we sinned and ate the fruit and had this, like they've got a very literalist interpretation to this static perfection of back to nature, snuggling up with lions.
It's going to be hard to that narrative, because it's so ideal, like they can just turn it into such a sustainability, all the things that you and we have been talking for, that is pro-life. That's all. It's just, I kind of read it and I think, wow, how are you going to counteract that narrative that they're going to bring out?
Give you a COVID vaccine. That's how.
Here, good points all around. Susie, and I think it was.
I noticed, just if we're going to comment on COVID, then news that came out, I think it was only yesterday that I was reading about this, that the current uptake of the latest booster is as low as 2% in America.
Yes.
That's funny. Yeah, nobody buys this anymore. Even
well, exactly. That would be my reading. That would be my reading. 98% of the population says no.
We don't want to. This is definitely going up on YouTube though, so we have to Fortunately, this conversation a bit. I'm so sorry.
Celebrate our wins when we can get them.
Susie.
Okay, well, I keep thinking about another Bible verse that always meant a lot to me, was the one in Romans where he talks about to not be conformed to this world system, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it is really amazing just how much these lectures have helped me in renewing my mind, realizing some of the places where, okay, that way of thinking that I was taught is not accurate. And so those false ideas fall. And just to really understand so much better universal history. It's just really cool, Matthew. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Then I also keep thinking about, okay, so Benjamin Franklin is called the Prometheus of America, right? And that's because he spread so much knowledge in so many ways. And Prometheus is supposed to have, felt bad for humans and brought us the fire of the gods. And we translate that into knowledge. So think about that whenever you see any of those scriptures talked about that talk about the earth is going to be cleansed by fire. It's not literally going to be burnt up.
What's crazy? I just watched, as I just mentioned, Prometheus with Cynthia in the theaters last night, and they actually start with the quote from Prometheus, and it's cited twice in that film, associated with nuclear bombs raining down hellfire from the sky caused by the mind of the great Prometheus of America, J. Robert Oppenheimer. So it's always associated with this idea that, well, that's what fire gets you. At the end of the day, see, by being a sinful, defiant, disobedient demigod that Prometheus was, giving fire to men who didn't deserve it, nuclear annihilation. Like, so you got these themes in Hollywood constantly just messing with the zeitgeist to make us ashamed of the idea that fire is something that we use, and good good animals don't use fire. They know how to abide by the laws of nature. It's nasty. But yeah, well said. And I think, yeah, anybody, there's something I think in a lot of the not all, but a lot of the Western Christian zeitgeist has really been infested by this Trojan horse, which has gotten a lot of us to believe that by using reason when it comes to the Bible, we're being prideful and thus disobedient to like thus sinful, right?
But see, that's another amazing thing that has happened for me in listening to your lectures. I had never studied any philosophy, but even in this reading, I gained the understanding that that term, Hellenistic Jews, is talking about those that have been trained according to the philosophy of Aristotle. They promoted Aristotle, and Plato had been kind of suppressed. And early on in these lectures, I don't know if it's real accurate, but I gained the opinion that Aristotle's form of philosophy is the kind that gets you running around in your head accomplishing nothing, but you're all puffed up thinking you're an intellectual giant. When Plato and his teachings, and especially his questions, causing you to think and search, that's what enlightens and enlivens the mind. And it actually leads to greater humility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you see the remarks of a Hellenized Jew reference, though, you'll tend, it's a more general term that could mean, that encapsulates Plato, Aristotle, everything Greek, and as a broad thing, good and bad alike. But usually it just means that there's more access to Greek philosophy, aesthetics in that cultural matrix of any culture that is Hellenized, so to speak. But yeah, everything you just said.
I think it's more disobedient to not be engaging your mind, because I believe God leads you in wisdom and understanding and learning.
Yeah.
Amen.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah. But just a small historical note, okay? Because since the conquest by Alexander in around 330 BCE, let's not forget that all the Mediterranean basin was permeated by Greek culture, okay, in terms of philosophy, in terms of perception of the world. So it's not a surprise that you have a lot of Greek concepts that can be found in the scriptures, okay, because Egypt was permeated by Greek cultures, the Levant was permeated by Greek culture.
Yeah.
Exactly what I meant by the politics of what we've just been reading. You know, the way, you know, the Hellenistic influence that was welded with Christian ideas that eventually won out. It was a combination of the two things, and you know, the combination of, let's say, Phileas and Jesus Christ. Just put the two of them together. They represent two slightly different intellectual streams that found common cause, were welded into one, and eventually won over in the face of enormous brutality. I mean, just sheer evil.
Well,
I mean, the sheer evil is part of the catalyst that made it work. It was a reaction against that as much as anything else.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by the politics of what we've just been reading the last, 4 weeks is what's really stood out for me. It's connected a lot of dots.
Yeah. But within the Greek matrix, you have the animal kingdom and you have the timeless reality. Okay, so the Roman Empire, the leaders of the Roman Empire were absolutely permeated within the Greek cultures too. Okay, so within any matrix, okay, Greek or otherwise, you have the animal kingdom and the timeless reality. So I would say that is more the basic dichotomy.
on
the threads that fascinate me, and I mean another one that comes to mind is when the Renaissance explodes across Europe. Why is it that the material that suddenly becomes available becomes so fascinating to the intellectual minds of the time? Well, having spent the last 4 weeks doing the reading that we've done, it's the politics. There is a certain Platonic stream of thinking that's written into the fundamentals of Christianity, so that when it explodes in the Renaissance once more, there's almost a direct connection. Oh, that's why it suddenly became so popular and so influential. The threads were already there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is what I mean by a little bit of dot connecting.
Add to that to what Susie just said as well regarding the potency of the Platonic method versus the stagnancy or problem that one will tend to get if one applies the Aristotelian method. Yeah. If you look at that, that's scholasticism. Like the one of the core tenets of the scholastic reforms in the church and how the Bible was studied by the intellectuals was Aristotle. That was like the Godhead, and the idea was to just focus on details to a that thing we make fun of where scholastics were arguing for weeks and weeks on how many angels can dance on the pinhead of a needle. Right. They would use Aristotelian logic to then take a detail from the scripture and then just dissect it and dissect it and dissect it to no end. And there would never ultimately be a moral purpose possible in that, but they would get whole departments of schools to then just do this sort of thing and ultimately give off the illusion of having active minds, but it's really captured in a small cage. That's not going to go anywhere.
It's captured in the cage of the second level of the mind development, the intellect.
Yeah.
Particle physics, anyone?
Exactly. That's exactly where my mind went to. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, the intellect is very interesting, but it has to be enlightened by the higher forms, the higher timeless forms.
Yeah. Some final causality is always nice.
Exactly.
Rick, then Ken. Rick.
Yeah, well, one thing I would like to say from this reading tonight about the growth, the development of the fascism and the crackdown on Christianity with its development, it kind of parallels YouTube. And what I mean by that is looking at the growth of the truth movement or the conspiracy movement. Yeah, hold on. For the last several, 2 decades, if you think of it as YouTube is in the internet in general is the digital Rome, right? That's the platform upon which we all stand and debate and talk. The Christians are the people questioning Kennedy, 9/11, things like that. People start getting deeper and deeper into truth and history and Freemasons. And then the Gnostics, the Simon Maguses, are the right-wing fascist alternative media, like alt-right, like they tell you secret knowledge. Oh, it's the Jews. It's all their fault. They would act like they know more, and it's the protocols of the elders of Zion, and they would lead people into thinking that it was white genocide and that it was all directed, and so then that radicalized a bunch of people into like doing violent acts. So then that caused the crackdown of YouTube. Like, oh my God, we got to do something. It's almost like it's significant to me that Simon Magus was sent before the Christians got to Rome preemptively, so that if you said, oh, you were a Christian, oh, you must be one of those Simon Magus, those crazy Gnostic cult people that want to eat babies or something like that. Oh, you're a truther. You question vaccines. Oh, you question 9/11. You must be a white nationalist. Like that intelligence infiltration thing aspect. And then the crackdown. At first, Christians were kind of free to preach their religion and spread, but then Rome was like, oh my God, we got to do something. We got to stop these people. What are we going to do? Let's infiltrate them. We got to crack down. And so it's kind of like that with the Cass Sunstein and the whole thing about, the disinformation and misinformation. We got to crack down on, it's when you become a threat to empire. That's when like latent fascism or latent totalitarianism, where it's dormant, and then it becomes active. They take off the gloves and they start really cracking down, hammering down once you become a threat to empire.
Absolutely. Good observation once again.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ken, I know you've been waiting for a bit, and then got Zachary and Monty. So yeah, Ken, are you still there?
Yep. I wanted to hark back to your little peroration sometime a few minutes ago when you were talking about the Venetian intrigues and that particular period of history and the secret societies. And I was just wondering, because that really got my spidey senses tingling, if there's a work that you know of that treats of that particular part of history, and maybe to study that in conjunction with a LaRouche monograph you were talking about, where he gets into the same sort of question from a different sort of perspective. I think that would be a very worthwhile endeavor, but I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, shoot me an email. Let me chew on that a little bit.
Sure.
I forgot to say something.
Sure,
there's even a group out there that call themselves Gnostic. Literally, they were promoting this white genocide at the hands of the Jews, or Jewish conspiracy to commit white genocide thing. There's a guy named John Lamb Lash who wanted to create a Calico warrior, and they go into this Germanic mystery cult stuff. There's actually people who call themselves truthers who call themselves literally Gnostics.
Oh yeah.
So that should hit you right there.
Yeah.
Matthew, we ought to go through that article that you mentioned that LaRouche wrote about the secrets known only to the inner elites. We ought to go through that in one of these Wednesday nights.
Well, I think you're right. I think it's a pretty important one. But what I'd like us to do, since this whole, everything's going down as it is with the Holy War thing in the Middle East, I would like the theme of reading a thing by Philo, and then a thing from an incredibly good, I don't know which Muslim scholar, just to get something eminently sane and universal from each of the three faiths, and maybe something short by Augustine or something would be good. And then we could feasibly do that LaRouche paper. I think that would be a nice way to bookend that cycle. Yeah.
But yeah, I understand what you're saying, because it really, really helps to really dig into each culture, because it just makes all of the divide and conquer strategies just dissolve.
Yeah.
So very good.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what in I mean, this theme's been coming up again and again, and it's much more clear in my mind. But right now I've been looking at the founding of the Templars, right? That's something I've been really researching a lot, and I find it really important. A lot of people they all approach it, a lot of the researchers, without a sensitivity of all of the stuff that we've been discussing here in this group. This sensitivity to the clash of paradigms, this higher epistemological process. They just don't do that. It's all kind of fetishistic-y and pattern associative thinking, which is kind of useless at the end of the day. It's useful to a limited degree, but you can't just do that. And when you look at who, I think one of the best ways to research this that I found, and I've just started really doing more of a deep dive, is the battle between Bernard de Clairvaux, who put two popes into power and wrote the charter for the Templars, like the entire constitution around which the Templars would be created was Bernard de Clairvaux in France. And his arch nemesis was Peter Abelard, who was this Augustinian.
Yes. The humanist. Yes.
Oh,
powerful. Yes.
And I think that's the drum I think that I'm going to try to really latch onto.
Who was persecuted, by the way, let's remember.
Oh, they destroyed him. Yeah, he had to live out his days as a mute. He wasn't allowed to speak the last decade of his life or longer because of Clairvaux. But Clairvaux is really...
That's great. No, that's a really important counterpoint. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that really gets across the whole scholastic, because Clairvaux's whole view of Christianity was obedience is the greatest good. The obedience to the text as it is interpreted by the priesthood is the greatest good you could possibly aspire to.
Well,
whereas Abelard was using the sin of saying...
Jesuits streaming from that, right? You can see the Jesuit theory coming right out of that.
Yeah, and it seems like the Franciscans also were very tied to that. And there's a weird continuation between the Franciscans, the Cistercians, which is what Abelard was also, and then the
with
creation
the
of the
Franciscans,
Jesuits.
then you get into the spiritual Franciscans, and there was a whole controversy around that, where
Yeah.
some of them really wanted to try to keep to the humility and the poverty, and there was another, there was an override of that eventually the papacy won out with the papacy.
Yeah, it's a fun story. It's definitely potent.
Yeah.
Zachary,
No,
you still-
that Abelard versus yeah, that would be fascinating research to go through together, I think.
Yeah, maybe we could weave that in somehow.
Yeah.
Zachary.
Hello, Matt.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. I do apologize for popping in very late. I didn't retire until probably a few hours ago, and didn't see the clock saying the time it was saying. Anyway, Matthew, I was short here. I need some clarification, and of course, you may not be able to do that here, but if I can just give you some points and you just record it or memory or however you would do that. You spoke about or someone mentioned Alexander the Great, and you were speaking about the setting, the time, and the connection. Basically, wasn't it his father, Philip of Macedon or Macedonia, that took all the sons of the nobles, brought them into the inner court, and literally says, I'm not going to send you home because your parents will have influence on you. And that's where it began, with grooming the think tank, not the army, because he already had the soldiers, the what do you call them? The other guys anyway. But the think tank, and Alexander was a boy then, so he grew up with these. Out of that came the Ptolemies, I think, something like that.
Yes.
But that's why I need some clarification on. The other thing wasn't King James, I think, second cousin to Henry VIII, who was a womanizer, and basically what he wanted to do was to walk away, Henry VIII, from the Catholic Church. So he started to come up with ways to get out of his marriage and to, threaten her around. By the time King James got to the throne, obviously he was indoctrinated. Remember what was happening? Elizabeth I, she was the devout sort of kind of Christian, if you want to call it that, and supposedly never knew a man. That's the other point. So the King James, Henry VIII connection, stuff like that. Thus far, may I say, you are on point on as you go forward. So what you've put out thus far, resonates. I'm not challenging in any of it. The one thing I need to know, and I only came up across this guy probably about 2 months before I discovered Professor Matthew Eric. Lyndon LaRouche. Okay, now I don't know anything, never knew about the guy. No one knew. Even when I asked some of the people back home, like, who's this guy? And I don't know, never heard of him. So I started to dig. We know the internet is not really a place you can take information from and say, that's law. So if you can, in closing, I don't know, point us to kind of a bit of this Lyndon LaRouche would be fantastic. And that's my spiel.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the first part, I don't know enough to speak on a lot of this. I know that James I I looked at their timelines. He was born after Henry VIII died. So I don't think he would have had a direct role to play in much of Henry's decisions based on that fact. But on the issue of the court intrigue around what was shaping the mind of the malleable Henry VIII, yeah, there's a lot on that. Webster Tarpley's done a lot on that. But I think one of the best things to do as far as an intro to a lot of this, and especially if you're just trying to get a good introduction efficiently to Lyndon LaRouche, we've been kicking about this essay that I referenced, and it came up a couple of times here in this discussion of The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites, 1978. It's a thick essay, kind of like what we just read, similar thickness, maybe bigger.
Yeah.
I would recommend starting with that one. You could just type it in Secrets Known Only.
Where is that?
You can Google it. Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites, Lyndon LaRouche. If you can't find it by that Google search, send me an email. I'll send you the PDFs. That's a good intro, I think. And then you could build on that. But there's a lot in there that also touches on your questions of Alexander the Great, Philip of Macedon, the broader dynamics shaping those two individuals. A lot of that is
wow. Okay.
Quite well.
Thank you.
Maybe I can say something about Philip of Macedon.
Oh yeah, go.
Let's not forget that after defeating the Greek city-states of Athens and Thebes at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, Philip II of Macedon led the effort to establish a federation of Greek states known as the League of Corinth, with him as the elected hegemon and commander-in-chief of Greece, and for a planned invasion of the Achaemenid Empire of Persia, which his son Alexander will achieve. So he created the institution first within Macedon, called in Greek hetairoi. Okay, and the Greek word hetairoi means companions, or the companions of the kings, the aristocrats, of course. So it's a way for him to unify the Macedonian nobility first, and with the nobility from the city-states from Greece afterward. And in a third step, his own son Alexander the Third, I think, would use the same method of hetairoi, meaning the companions, to incorporate the nobility of the Persian Empire within the Greek matrix. So if you can call it think tank if you want, but it's a kind of control unification.
It's an oligarchy.
Excuse me?
It's an oligarchy.
Absolutely. It's an oligarchy. And I would say that oligarchy is not a dirty word for me. What is needed is that before oligarchy, we have a democratic oligarchy, at least, or aristocratic oligarchy, if it's better.
One question: do you have any thoughts regarding if there is? I'm sure there is, but the unveiling or the creation of the Silk Road and the earlier efforts by Alexander to go east and to create sort of a relationship between West and East culturally, probably economically. Do you know if anybody has done good work on that in your research or yourself?
Not at my knowledge, because I think that the best is, of course, what happened in India. Okay, I think that he went there, and because you know perfectly that he tried to go further, but his troops were not willing to go further because it has been such a journey and endeavor for them. And also, but that's you already know, the faction from Aristotle's and from the non-aristocratic oligarchy wanted him to be at the head of a kingdom, dominating the people who have been vanquished, and not being the universal monarch that he wanted to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of big discoveries waiting to be had there.
Yeah, but he has been poisoned, as you know, because
Mhm.
and it's mostly from his former Macedonian companions
Mhm.
who were not too willing to share the power.
Mhm.
Monty. Hey, man.
So thank you. Just an observation. It's fascinating me just thinking about the current era, what we're looking at so far as the development of the BRI and Russia and what's been transpiring. And one thing that fascinates me, I think there's been a revival of Russian or Eastern Orthodoxy in Russia in particular. A great percentage of the people identifying with it have been a great resurgence. And one of my observations is it appears that the Eastern Orthodox Church has been somewhat less affected by all the fantasies and so far as the tribulation, the dispensationalists, the Darbyism, and so forth. In other words, there's something that goes way back. And one observation I have in 1993, at the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russians adopted a new coat of arms, double-headed eagle, which goes back, it's ancient Greek, goes back to the Byzantine Empire and the East and West, the two-headed eagle, whatever it might have represented. But one fascinating thing I note in this, particularly given the Russians' commitment to more or less development and a more traditional view of Christianity, is that the center of the coat of arms of the Russian current coat of arms is St. George. And St. George was actually born in Turkey. His parents were Greek Christians, and he was beheaded by Diocletian in 303 AD for refusing to give up his Christian faith. And actually, he's quite venerated in not only the Orthodox Church, but the Roman Catholic Church, the Oriental Orthodoxy, the Church of the East, along with Islam. And just in the whole history and the stories and the mythologies that we've been considering, I think it's quite relevant. There's something actually at the center of the Russian heraldry today that's been resurrected. And this really is a matter of culture, is brought the Russian people together around a different idea that's not so corrupted by all this fantasy stuff that's infected the West. So just an observation, I think it might be worthy of further consideration insofar as what we're looking at.
You're very correct in the sense that Eastern Orthodoxy doesn't have the same prophetic aspects as Roman Catholicism.
I can wait for my turn.
And Protestantism.
I can wait for my turn if there are other people in front of me, but I would like to reply to Monty. It's one of my obsessions.
Yeah, do it.
Okay. Once again, I'm sorry to be a pain in the ass, but for repeating that answer for the third time today. It's the Bureau of Religious Affairs, because there's a difference in Orthodox Christianity compared to the Western Christianity. Okay, in the Orthodox Christianity, they received the legacy from the Eastern Roman Empire, and in the Eastern Roman Empire, the emperor or the basileus is the homologue of Christ on earth. Okay, so the highest character in the state is not the Pope or the Patriarch, it's the emperor himself. And being of Chinese cultural background, I cannot prevent myself to make a rapprochement with the fact that the Chinese emperor is the son of heaven. So there is no one within the Chinese empire, religiously, spiritually, that is higher than the emperor. So same in Russia, because of the legacy from Constantinople. And why does it make a difference? It makes a difference because the guy who is responsible for everyday chore of administration, of justice, of peace and order is the same than the guy having to check, let's say, the value, the orthodoxy, the quality of the religious matrix. Okay. In the West, because of the separation between the emperor or the different kings and the guy who is theoretically the guardian of the quality of the religious matrix, I would say that it can have certain advantages, but it gives rise to a disadvantage, which is that it opens a space for a lot more mythology. And if you have a more open space for a lot more mythology, you need to have a population that is advanced epistemologically. If you don't have a population that is advanced mythologically, they wouldn't be manipulated by that opening in the possibility of mythological creation. So there is no perfect answer to that. I'm not saying that Russian or the Chinese model is superior. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they are different, and because of that difference, it's easier to make a lot of mythology or storytelling, and because of that, it's easier to manipulate people if they are not epistemologically advanced.
We have a republic if we can keep it.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of liberty,
Absolutely.
a lot
Absolutely.
of liberty to be stupid. So you have to be really careful that people aren't don't normalize stupidity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also accountability too.
System. An entire education system dedicated to the proposition.
Yeah.
Let's make everybody stupid.
Yeah. No. Yes. Yes. Wow. And here it's the last time I would say it tonight, because once again I don't want to be a pain in the ass. I suggest to every statesman in the West to open a bureau of religious affairs.
I like it.
And I can be the first director general for that.
Oh, wait a minute.
Well, definitely, I noticed that Nathan, you wanted to speak, right?
Sorry, that was funny. I'm sorry. That was awesome.
That is one of the biggest weak spots in the Roman Catholic experience or in the West, is exactly what Quan was just saying, because there is this this tendency through the work of beautiful humanists like Nicholas of Cusa and you know, Da Vinci and Peter Abelard and so many other greats. They created a space of Promethean, of really appreciating this Promethean quality of the sacredness of the individual as a unique personality, and the expression of that in the form of the belief that everybody could become, even if you're not from a hereditary bloodline that's special or something, but everybody could become a genius in some degree and make contributions to the whole. That's a beautiful idea, and it's a sacred, in my view, it's a sacred truth, but it's so much power that it creates a space for decadence. And that's one of the biggest Achilles heels of the Renaissance that caused its corruption. There's a lot of decadence, immoral decadence that wore the garb of a lot of like great sensual beauty in the music, in the painting, in the sculpture, and the architecture, which made people really corrupt, unfortunately. So it's like the higher you are, the harder you fall. It's like a technology, right? That idea of a social order based upon the sacredness of a Promethean spirit of the individual. It's like a technology, and if you misuse a technology of high power because you weren't qualified to use it, you could do a lot of damage. So yeah, you have to be very careful on the education and on the culture. Like, you can't skip steps like we did in the West. Otherwise, we create a monstrosity. Doesn't mean that it was bad to do the Renaissance. It's a good thing. It's just we gotta not throw the baby out with the bathwater and still recognize where this thing went awry. Yeah.
That was a good analogy.
Thanks. Well, it's 10:40. Any final thoughts here before we close it out today?
Well, thank you guys for the wonderful discussion.
As always.
Good reading. Good
Yeah,
reading.
Yeah, as always.
So yeah, let's do this. Let's next week we'll I think the Philo's work on Genesis is really good. So I'll try to find it. I think it's small enough that we can read it in probably 3 or 4 sessions, I believe. I'll review it. So we'll do Rabbi Philo. We'll do something hopefully right after that in the Muslim matrix, and then we'll go from there. We'll play it by ear. So we'll see. But until then, next Sunday we have Jerry
Take
Theriault,
care, everyone.
Jerry Theriault on King Arthur, the real King Arthur, and hope to see everybody there. And if you can't make it there, I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.
Great. Thanks.